Welcome to Longevity Industries' presentation of the Destiny of Manufacturing podcast. I'm your host, Dean Phillips, and with me today, I am fortunate enough to have with me Allison Grealis. Allison is, of course, the president of the Women in Manufacturing Association and the Educational Foundation over there at the Women in Manufacturing. Welcome, Allison.
Thanks, Dean.
Great to have you with me today. Tell me, what is your key takeaway as you look forward to 5 years from now? What are some of the changes you see coming?
Well, I think the current pandemic has impacted manufacturing companies of all sizes. The Women in Manufacturing World Trade Association that's now more than 5,000 individual members strong, and we have now 130 corporate members of all different sizes. And our organization has definitely seen adaptation and changes in how our manufacturing companies, how they work with their employees, how they're working with customers, and also how they're kind of meeting the needs and kind of adapting technology much quicker than maybe in the past, given the current impact of the pandemic and the urgency it's caused for their organization. Our companies that we talk to on a very frequent basis have shared with us an impact in all those areas from the pandemic. And we definitely think in the next 5 years that this impact that the pandemic has caused will be long-lasting. So not only, I think, how companies work, but also, again, how they engage with customers and suppliers.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that some of the changes that we're seeing right now, they're here to stay. And some of that is good, because I think understanding the opportunities that this provides for us of people working from home, how can they, and developing a program for that. I think a lot of people have talked about it for a long time, but making the commitment and doing something about it's a whole different thing. And now we're seeing that almost every company has something in place for how they're dealing with this. So tell me.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. I think what we've heard from companies, just to share. So one of the things we launched at the start of the pandemic was a function and feature called Community Chat. So when individuals and companies weren't able to participate in our live meetings through our chapters, which we have 27 throughout the country, or internationally produced programs, we decided to launch a Community Chat, which was a weekly series that brought together members from all over the country to have live dialogue about how they're responding to COVID in the pandemic. And it was really interesting to hear from so many of our members during these weekly community chats that how resistant some of their companies had been previously to flexible work arrangements, work from home options, and how the pandemic was really causing an awakening from their leadership and from decision makers about the adaptability of their workforce and also the productivity that could be gained and achieved through people working in a home setting.
I agree. There's been a lot of shift from the standpoint of monitoring equipment from remotely and accepting of that. Whereas before, I think there still was always this standoff level of, well, do we really know what's going on? And instead now with a lot of the IoT stuff, we're really making some progress in that way. And I think that's good for companies in the long run to know what's going on. Their people can work from home safely. They can still be productive. And that's, I think, was the biggest fear that most companies had was, are these people working from home really going to be able to be productive? And I think they've seen it has worked out. I haven't heard almost any cases at all about people not being productive from home or anything like that.
Yeah, and I think there's so many collaboration tools and technology tools now that have made it really possible for near full workforces, aside from those who are on the production line, to be able to work remote. I think as well, if you look at just the power of the pandemic and now causing a lot more as it relates to virtual meetings. So I just had a conversation, a meeting with one of a donor for our education foundation yesterday, and we were chatting about the fact that now that we're also accustomed to sharing our screen and sharing our face and our setting on Zoom, It's made for a much more personal and interactive way that we're interfacing with customers, donors, members, and stakeholders. And I think it's been a real neat experience to get to meet people, or virtually meet people that in the past you would have just been on a very dry and distant conference call with.
Absolutely. I agree. And I think it's solidified some relationships that way because people are in a new location, but you get to see their personal side of them.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get to be involved with the women in manufacturing and kind of be now the president? And I've seen that you just released the Hall of Fame, so to speak, of women in manufacturing for the first year. So tell us a little bit about that.
We did. Yeah, so my background, I was not a direct woman in manufacturing, but was definitely familiar with manufacturing. My father had worked for Firestone Tire and Rubber for much of his career and actually moved us from upstate New York to Akron, Ohio, the rubber city, with his career at Firestone Tire and Rubber. So I was familiar with it. My background was English pre-law women's studies. And after my first nonprofit job in Boston after college, I went and got my master's in public administration. And I always had an interest of working with nonprofits or in the public sector. So having found a career 20 years ago, or nearly 20 years ago, to working with trade associations was really rewarding. So the bulk of my career has been spent today with the Precision Metalforming Association. And while working with them, I had the opportunity to work with many leading women in metalforming. So women that were often second, third generation family members, who many of which were taking over their family businesses. And so in working with them, they often were looking for resources, looking for materials that we could bring into some of their programs and events. And I was shocked to find there wasn't a national association or resource for women in manufacturing. So my group that I was working with at the time, some volunteer leaders, we created a conference, which we called a summit, and it was held in 2001. And we created this conference event and had 132 women from all over the country attend. And they asked while in attendance, how do I join? How do I stay connected? This is so great. What a great community this is fostering. And so I went back to the office, created a business plan, created a membership model, and we started welcoming members. So for 9 years, the past 9 years, or 9 of the past 10 years, I had been both Vice President of Association Services for PMA and then the President of WIM. And just this past April, I transitioned to full-time President of both the Association for Women in Manufacturing as well as our Education Foundation. So it has been great. We've had a wonderful 10 years of growth for the Women in Manufacturing Association. We've had huge growth as it relates to our individual members, our companies, as well as the programs and services that we deliver, including some formal leadership programs, virtual learning, many opportunities for networking and connecting. And the Hall of Fame is one of our newest celebrations of trailblazing women in manufacturing. So we created the Hall of Fame last year in concept, and then we had a very robust judging process. We had close to 50 nominees, and we selected 15 women, outstanding women, in manufacturing who are being inducted in our virtual Women in Manufacturing Hall of Fame inductions to be held on October 1st from 11:30 to 1 p.m. Eastern. And it is open registration, free to register. And we hope lots of people will dial on and be participatory to celebrate these for this first class of women in manufacturing inductees.
That's excellent. I'm looking forward to it. I know quite a few of the people on there, not all of them personally, but I do know quite a few from either through SME and through PMA, and they're all very qualified candidates and excellent leaders. And I will say that most of the people on there that I personally know are incredible leaders. So I think you guys have put together a great list.
Thank you. They're very accomplished women.
Yes. And so tell me about where you think 5 years from now, what we're going to be looking at as we play out the whole coronavirus and the next 5 years of manufacturing advancements and technology. And I think even more importantly, on educational side of it, where do you think some of that is going?
If I was to predict what 5 years from now looks like for manufacturers and for the workforce, I definitely think manufacturing has forever changed. And I think that's a common observation that most people in the industry have. I think this pandemic has again caused manufacturing companies to be forced to be a bit more progressive thinking, to adopt new technologies, new tools that maybe they were a bit more hesitant to do so in the past. And I think you're going to see that adaptation and adoption of technology tools continue to speed up and to be something that is prioritized in the next few years for organizations to have now seen how it's been able to work to have kind of global connectivity. And I think that hesitation and fear of these technology and these collaboration productivity tools, I think that fear and trepidation, I think, is now reduced, and companies will adapt to some of these things more quickly and readily in years to come. I think the workforce, as we talk to manufacturing companies, what we're hearing right now is that there's a huge continued need for hiring, especially at production level positions, as well as people in leadership, people to be leading operations and plants and facilities all over the country and globe. And as we've talked to manufacturing companies, I think hiring is going to be continue to be a challenge. And so I think looking at new ways to hire and recruit is going to be something that is going to progress over the next 5 years. One of the things that we've designed in collaboration with our manufacturing member companies are to hold virtual career fairs. So companies who would have spent many dollars on in-person recruiting, being on college campuses, working with engineering schools, many of them can't be in the field. Schools aren't potentially live or having live classes or people on campus. So I think virtualization of these career fairs is going to be a common and something that's going to continue. And I think we'll look at even more unique ways of recruiting talent going forward for companies, because they need obviously to fill their pipeline, and I think they're going to have to use again technology in new ways of recruiting and finding talent. I think also that this power of kind of networking is going to continue to change for manufacturing companies. And talking with many of them, they see forever reduced probably schedule to which they'll be traveling to facilities. Probably reduced participation in live meetings and events, at least for the next 6 months, the 2 years or 24 months. So I think you'll see more people, again, virtualizing their meetings with leaders at facilities, their meetings at industry conferences. And I think, again, the virtualization of that will be pretty common for years to come, and probably for the next 5 years and beyond. I think, people have taken this pause in kind of lots of things of how work normally happened. And I think have really reevaluated companies and teams, what travel and expenses are really necessary. And as well, how can I get work done, but more effectively and more virtually? So I think that will continue to change. One of the interesting things is we've recently surveyed our corporate members, and nearly half of them still shared that they plan to invest in external training and education in the future. But I think as well, when they say external, I think a lot of that's going to be happening. And what we're hearing from manufacturing companies is that's going to be virtual external leadership development training. So I think, again, having those virtual tools and assets is critical. So one of the things that we're looking at as an organization is bolstering the amount of virtual sessions and learning that we have in our on-demand library, for example, and looking at, again, virtualizing training for all levels of people in manufacturing. So one of the new programs we have in development is an empowering shop floor women's program that will be delivered entirely in a virtual format and setting, so that companies can, again, look at those women who are very ripe and primed to be promoted or to perhaps move to that first promotion or step up within their organization, and looking at virtual tools to accomplish that.
That's excellent, too. I really think that as we move forward, this, if you really look at it, there's going to be a lot of new opportunities created because of this. And I know there's a lot of downside from what's happened, but it's really opened our eyes, I think, in a lot of ways to what we have to acknowledge and admit that we really hadn't embraced these systems of technology, and we hadn't really embraced the idea of how do we work remotely. We've talked about it, but didn't do it. What are some of the other things you think technology-wise are going to be shifting?
I think as well, some of the shifts that we'll see is again, I think we'll see the development of new tools that don't even exist present day for, again, team communication, team collaboration. I think as well as we look at kind of plant floor and facility operation, there were already some early adapters that were using things like Google Glass and using some real-time monitoring and production tools. I think you're going to see more and more companies of all different sizes finding those tools and, again, finding ones that fit within their budget to adopt on their shop floor and in their facilities. I think for the near term, you're going to see companies finding new technology tools to use, for example, for safety purposes, for contact tracing. I've heard of some really innovative things that some companies are doing as it relates to kind of tracking and using real high-tech but low-cost tools that they can track kind of traceability of where people have been, who they've been in contact with within facilities, so that if, gosh forbid, someone was to test positive for COVID, they can trace where that person had been in the facility throughout the course of their workday. So I think you're going to see new tools created. I think you're going to see more companies of all different sizes adopting and investing in those technology tools. And again, I think that you'll see improvements on current platforms that we're currently using. So now that you have such a huge population that are using platforms like Zoom and GoToMeetings and Teams, I think you're going to see more and more improvement in those tools to add even more functionality. So rather than just a basic chat function, maybe opportunities where more screen sharing can happen or more interactive boards. So I think you're going to see improvements in those, because I think as I've talked to many manufacturers, some teams will never go back to a physical brick and mortar building. I mean, I think we've heard about what the impact's going to be on the commercial real estate industry, but I think you're going to see more and more leases not renewed, more and more new buildings not purchased or built, and you're going to see more and more remote working. And so I think you're going to see these tools become even more powerful as teams continue to be remote for the future.
Yeah, I'm also involved quite a bit with Toastmasters, and since that was very much a face-to-face organization where it was all meeting face-to-face and talking in a face-to-face environment, this has changed it completely to where everybody's, I think right now, over 80% of the clubs that existed are meeting face-to-face. And that means that people are learning how to use these tools. And part of it is that this is the new work environment too. So when you're talking about skill set, you're going to have to know how to use these tools. You're going to have to know how to communicate using these tools, because this is how people are job interviewing now. I think only, people I've heard that have been doing hiring, almost all the interviews are being conducted via Zoom until they've gotten down to one or two candidates, so that they're limiting their exposure of people on both sides. They're limiting their exposure by somebody coming in, and they're limiting that person's exposure by visiting a dozen people at a company. Do you think what are some of the opportunities that are being created because of this in technology and in collaborative spaces?
Yeah, I think some of the opportunities that we've seen firsthand is this new world of connectivity. So whereas, for example, when we would deliver live programs, especially those produced by our local chapters, they were constrained by geography. So they were a locally produced program. We had just people from that region participating. What's really interesting is that our chapters, which we have 27 throughout the country, they're now producing virtual events, which they've, I think, now had 55 since April 1st. And in these virtual meetings, we have people from all over the country participating in these locally produced programs by a chapter because the topic was of interest. There's no need to have to travel or be geographically close to where that chapter is that's producing it. So you see a whole bunch of new business opportunities and connections being made with people outside of what would have been a geographically constrained area. So I know that I've seen great benefit from participation. We've got, for example, like a Texas chapter would hold a virtual event on, for example, a topic like negotiation. and you'd have people from all over the U.S. dialing because that topic was of interest, and using technology and collaborative tools like the groups and the breakout option with Zoom. They were able to, in a small group setting, network and make new business connections with people who could be potential customers, suppliers, or potential just connections professionally that people may want to stay in touch with. So I think those tools are really, they're growing businesses, they're creating new business opportunities. And I know as well, one of the benefits in terms of business development has been the fact that you don't have people traveling right now. So people that maybe would have been previously very difficult to reach are now at home, or they're within their home state or in a single facility. So you're more likely to be able to set up an in-person, virtual call with someone to talk about partnership or funding or working together. So I think that collaboration opportunities through virtual tools is making those connections possible that maybe wouldn't previously have been something that would have been able to happen.
Yeah, I've seen so many new opportunities created in that way. In the old days, or when I say old days, even going back to just last year, I should just say pre-COVID is what I should say. But in past times, when you're talking about how an event was being generated, most of those were being done on a local level. Most of the trade shows would tell you that most of the attendees come from the geographical area around there. With this virtual collaboration, these virtual shows and these virtual opportunities are creating a wider net that they're casting, and they can reach a lot more people through these new platforms than that were available before. What
Definitely.
Yeah, what do you think as far as that goes? Where is this going to take us for those types of events, those face-to-face events?
I think that the live events will forever be impacted, beyond 5 years from now, as we talk about predictions. I think live events are never going to look the same. I think that for individuals, as we talked about kind of budgets and reevaluation, I think before a person goes to a live event, there's got to be definite value for them for making that trip, being there live, and that live experience is obviously got to be safe, but it's got to be rich with content, with in-person value, because I think we're all going to be so accustomed to learning on demand, virtually connecting, and as well being able to have kind of recorded access or easy access to things. That events are going to probably look different. They're going to have to be created differently with kind of special opportunities for those that are participating live. And I think forever we'll probably see an integration in future events of a live and a virtual component. I think you're going to have people that are going to want to prefer for the near future or for forever to be just virtually participating in things. And so I think you're going to have this hybrid or dual option for most future programs that people can do one or the other, be there live as a participant and an attendee, or virtually get to visit an exhibit hall or meet with vendors. And I think, again, some of the current platforms are really amazing. Another one that we've selected for our upcoming 10th annual summit has an opportunity for virtual exhibits where people can talk live with exhibitors. Exhibitors can set up one-on-one meetings. They can share white papers, videos. So it can be like being at a physical exhibit. And then what's cool about certain platforms, including ours, is that it can live beyond the show. So what would have been perhaps a traditional show week or a conference week, you can extend the length of that and have even more benefit to your exhibitors and your attendees by letting it live for 3, 6, 9 months, however much longer you'd like after the conference, so that business connections can continue to be made and different information sharing can happen. So I think it's a whole new day, and I think that on us as association execs and producers of conferences and events, it really takes some creativity as to how to tackle hybrid meetings and events, and then as well how to add special benefits for being live versus just a virtual participant.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's a brave new world, so to speak.
Yes.
But I think again, it's it's filled with new opportunities, and we have to embrace that idea that some things are, you're going to have to always have some level of manufacturing, and manufacturing is still going to be an in-person thing. You're going to have to go to work to manufacture things, unless it's done electronically and you're just working a robot from remote. But I think in general, manufacturing for the foreseeable future is going to continue to be a face-to-face thing. But that does not mean that we can't use the tools like engineering and doing these things remotely and attending conferences remotely. And in general, this is reducing exposure to risk. When was the last time you heard of somebody having a cold now during this?
Right.
I haven't heard a lot of people having colds. I haven't heard of a lot of people being sick as you would have normally, because they're just not exposed like they used to be to other things and other people. So
right.
All you hear is anytime somebody has a cough, everybody just assumes it's COVID.
Right.
But,
very true.
Yeah.
We're just not out traveling. We're not interacting. We're
right.
staying safe. And I think that's a good thing. Normally, I travel almost every week, and it's been so strange to not be on a plane and in hotels and sharing space with lots of people. But I think you're citing one of the great benefits of that. This reduced space that we're all sharing is causing less of us to get sick from just other normal things like colds and flus and other things that aren't COVID.
Yeah, yeah. And I see more use being explored of using drones, where people would use a drone for going into areas that might be hazardous, or using robots. In fact, there's actually a product out there that I saw called CodiBot, CODI bot, and I've seen that what it does is it does cleaning of areas where people may have had COVID, so it's just a robot that goes and cleans. And it also does things like has an adapter to actually measure temperature for people too. So you have less exposure of other people, because the most exposed people are the people conducting, which may be a healthcare person or somebody else, but measuring temperatures and being around people and handling things that they're handling. So I think technology can serve a great purpose in these times if we let it and not fear it. What are some of the other challenges that you hear coming from your members that they're concerned about over these the next 5 years?
I think the main worries that we're hearing about present day, manufacturers seem to have confidence that the industry is going to recover from the pandemic. Some of the companies we're talking to actually had a positive quarter. They weren't as dramatically impacted by some others. But I think one of the key challenges that we're still hearing from companies is that they do have concerns around talent. So how can they recruit? Where are they going to find this talent from? As well, I think a lot of them are looking for benchmarking, so kind of learning from those top or better performing companies to perhaps adopt some of those practices or some of those things in place for their companies to add additional security and positivity for them in months to come. But I think one of the current continued challenges is around workforce. So how do they feel positioned, especially given a time when you can't recruit, when there is more difficulty perhaps connecting with people who are recent graduates of community colleges or traditional four-year programs. So I think recruitment and talent is going to continue to be a key challenge, and that's what we're hearing from manufacturers. We had a board call yesterday with 20 manufacturing executive leaders, and that was the most robust discussion we had during our call was around talent and recruiting.
Yeah, and I think that it's more challenging now because you can't physically see the individual, but you just have to find ways to use tools like virtual meetings to make that happen. Well,
right, and I think it connects to marketing as well.
Yes.
So if you're trying to reach people, especially in in either those in transition or those first career where you're trying to recruit for production level positions. It's being more creative with marketing. So how do you share the story of your company, the story of what a manufacturing career looks like? So I think you're going to see companies getting creative and innovative in some of their approaches and sharing their company story and their opportunities.
Yeah, that's and I think that's a great way to look at how we need to, as an industry, as manufacturers as a whole, we need to market ourselves. And we seem to overlook that. We market our products, but we don't seem to market our industry in the same way. But we're getting better. We're getting better. I will say that, but it's something that we've struggled with.
There's definite improvement. Yeah. I mean, when I started 20 years ago working with metal forming companies, the vast majority of them didn't have websites.
Right.
So to look at present day and companies having often, of course, now often have websites, or I think the vast majority of them do. But now seeing companies of all different sizes with dedicated people responsible for marketing and messaging and people often even with groups or individuals responsible for social media and for customer and community engagement. All of that stuff is really important, especially as you're looking to recruit this younger tech-savvy generation of potential talent. Yeah. So I think you're going to see more and more investments made in those areas. And of course, I think that the equally important piece of it is retention and advancement. So once you recruit these great individuals, what type of professional development plans can you put them on? Does your culture match with the expectations of some of these new generations coming into the workforce? So I think there's lots of work in both those areas of recruitment and retention.
Yeah, that's one of the areas that I think, even going back to maybe 5 to 10 years ago, it was illustrated that you need to, with millennials and coming out, was to you need to have a plan for them. You need to be able to show them where they're going, how they're going to get there, and you need to illustrate that to them in ways you didn't do with maybe your previous workforce, because they want to see progress. They want to know that the company they work for sees a future. They want to know that they're part of it. They want to see where they're going to contribute and how they're going to advance.
Right. Yeah, they want a plan. I mean, they want to see a demonstrated plan and design. And something I learned firsthand over the last few years, as I've had many millennial talented women join my team, is that, communication is king. Millennial talented individuals want lots of communication, clear communication, as with every employee. But I think millennials prioritize it even more. They want to be in the know. They want to be communicated regularly with and be updated, and then have very clear communication from leaders in the organization about kind of what is this pathway, what's the plan, what's going to happen, or what are we projecting for next quarter, next few years, 5 years, as you said beyond.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Allison. We're actually out of time here, so I'm going to thank you so much for being here. Today we've had Allison Grealis with us here from the Women in Manufacturing Association and Educational Foundation. Allison, how can people get in touch with you?
So our website's the best way, www.womeninmanufacturing.org. There you can find out lots of information about us and then directly reach out to me. Excellent.
Well, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Yeah, thanks, Dean.